We'll pray. Father God, we thank you for the United States of America and for the state of South Dakota. What a privilege and an honor it is to live here of all places. Thank you for how you're using the Pennington County GOP to preserve what matters most and to work for those that we want to see in office, to bring change where it needs to be brought and to maintain what needs to be maintained, and especially to stand for what is right and good, and if possible, implement biblical truth throughout our government. We thank you for what we get to do today. We thank you for feeding us retroactively. We ask your blessing on all the good things that you have given us, and we thank you again for the prosperity that is ours here in the United States as well. And we give you thanks in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. You ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So I want to welcome a couple our special guests here this afternoon, State Treasurer Josh Hader and Lieutenant State Treasurer Jason Williams. And I have to tell you that I've spent time in their office. They invited me in for a chat, and I became friends. We become friends. They're a couple of really good guys, and I think you'll be very interested in what they have to say. So come on up, guys.
Well, let me tell you, if I could move and vote for Brian, be done, man. That's a great job. We wish you all the best, of course. Again, State Treasurer Josh Hader, I want to start out just by saying thank you to everybody here for the support that you've given Jason and myself. Really, over the past 6 years, it's the volunteers, it's the folks who show up that really make all the difference at the end of the day. So I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you guys very much for all the support that you've given us and to help us do a great job in the Treasurer's office. Today, we're going to get into a legislative update. We had a fantastic legislative session this year, and Jason's going to handle that. But before we get into that, I thought it was important to talk a little bit about why I ran for treasurer in the first place. And I think what you'll find out is that actually plays into what we're talking about a little bit today. So prior to being treasurer and prior to working for Senator Rounds as a senior aide, I was the chief operating officer for a national credit counseling agency called Allen Credit and Debt Counseling Agency. And what we did there is bankruptcy credit counseling. There was a law that was put on the books about 20 years ago that said if you want to file for bankruptcy, you're required to go through 2 credit counseling courses. Number 1, to make sure you can go through bankruptcy, and number 2, to get it discharged. So the story I always tell is and it's a heartbreaking one at the end of the day, but it did give me some passion for wanting to help people out that are in financial distress is, listening to a counseling session of a young married couple, say in their late 20s, early 30s. Call in and say, well, we need to go through the bankruptcy process so we can file for divorce. And you hear that far too often because finances affect everything at the end of the day. When you dig a little bit deeper into that, the couple each had about $65,000 to $70,000 in student loan debt. They each had a brand new vehicle at about $700 a piece. They had a $456,000 home, beautiful home. They each had $7,000 in unsecured credit card debt at 29% interest. They just had a new child, new baby at home, and they had a medical emergency and no money set aside for that at the end of the day. I mean, it's truly heartbreaking stuff. And by the way, their combined income was under $150,000. Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of Burt Blyleven, but he always says the math is not mathing on that. And so, when you hear those type of stories, and we help thousands of people, we helped about 7,000 people a month, which is incredibly heartbreaking. And these people were not bad people at the end of the day. The unfortunate thing is they didn't have a good example, and they didn't have the tools available to take control of their financial future. And so that was something that was an absolute passion of mine when I first ran for treasurer, was number 1, those individuals' financial health. And so if you go to sdtreasurer.gov, you'll notice that we have tools available for folks. We don't mandate it. Government shouldn't mandate things, but tools available that are being taken advantage of every single day by young people and families to take control of their finances. So it's something I'm very proud of, that we've been able to do that. But the flip side of that is, not only is I fascinated with individuals' financial health, I've been absolutely fascinated, concerned, excited about the state's financial health at the end of the day. And so that gets directly into our legislative update today, that we're going to talk a little bit about unclaimed property. I'm going to let Jason get into it with the slideshows a little bit. And this is not a speech. So as Jason starts going through this stuff, raise your hand, ask questions. This is supposed to be interactive at the end of the day, and I'll chime in from time to time. So Jason, the Batman and Robin show begins. Go ahead and get into this.
All right, so I was fortunate to start as deputy treasurer for Josh when he became treasurer in 2019. And this is really one of the more interesting topics that the treasurer's office deals with, and it was really eye-opening to us to find out just how the state handles unclaimed property. And thankfully, a lot of the way the state's been handling it has changed, so after this legislative session. So I'll just get into it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, but it's a lot easier to go through with a PowerPoint just because there's so many numbers. All right, so unclaimed property or abandoned property refers to property or accounts that have from financial institutions or businesses that have been dormant, that haven't had any interaction with the original owner for probably up to 3 years or longer, and then they ultimately are responsible to turn over to the state. Once that property comes to the state, they turn it over to us. A lot of that property has social security numbers, last known addresses or other data, and then we hold that information until we can find the rightful owner, or the rightful owner comes forward.
Now, Jason hates when I do this, but I'm going to do it because it probably screws up the slides a little bit. Can anybody take a guess, just this year, non-legislators, of course, because you already know legislators, how much money did we bring in for unclaimed property in the state of South Dakota this year? Anybody want to take a guess? 650 million. Oh, 300 million. So that's the largest number we've brought in by over $100 million. So this was the biggest year for unclaimed property in South Dakota, and Jason will dive into that a little bit too.
Yeah, so up here on the screen right now, you'll see various types of unclaimed property. It can really come from anything, but checks, checking accounts, dormant accounts, savings, bonds, securities, safety deposit boxes, that type of thing.
I got to hold up again. I've always got a story to tell. So the money stuff is fine. It comes from banks, stocks, bonds, dividends, securities, things like that. But the one thing I never expected when serving in this role is what you get in safety deposit boxes. You'd be amazed how many safety deposit boxes we see. Some of the things that we've gotten that are interesting is a woman's ashes. We've gotten gold teeth, but some of the more cool, interesting things that you get that don't have any dollar value, but they have high intrinsic value, are like World War II letters and love letters. So we can destroy those if we want because they don't have any actual value. The things that have value we sell, by the way, but the things that don't have value we can destroy. But we always try to hang on to those type of things because they can mean something to a family at the end of the day. So that's one of the more fascinating things I did not expect when taking this job.
So right here, this shows what the dormancy periods are for everything. You can see wages are 1 year. That would be if you work somewhere and you don't get your last check, you move. They're required to turn it over to the state after 1 year of inactivity, where other things like savings accounts, checking accounts, securities, 3 years. So how do you find your unclaimed property? You can go to cash.sd.gov.
Get your phones out now. Look while we're talking. See if your name's on the list.
Do a quick search to find out if your name's on the list. It's very helpful if you look up your friends too, because a lot of times that's the best way to find somebody is through a referral. But it's a very simple process once you go to the website cash.sd.gov to find if you're on the list. Missingmoney.com. That would be more of a national type of thing. So if, states feed into that, all the states feed into that. So a holder would be like a financial institution or a business that would turn over the property to the state. Currently, we have over 26,000 active holders who have filed information with the state of South Dakota to turn over unclaimed property. So this gets into what Josh talked about. Not all property that's turned over to the state of South Dakota is necessarily financially valuable.
I guess I should have looked at the slides before we started.
Yeah. So unclaimed property, it can be claimed forever. Once it's turned over to the state, if you don't find it, your heirs can claim it. It's something that is held by the state in perpetuity. You or your heirs are allowed to come forward and claim it.
So you see the bottom bullet there. How much unclaimed property? Oh, you ruined it. I was going to ask the question. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. That's all right. The 1.2 billion. That's exactly right. He went a little too fast with that.
So as you can see, we have $1.2 billion in claimable cash. 2.5 million properties have been turned over to South Dakota that are currently searchable in that database.
And I know Jason's going to get into this, but one thing to touch on when it says $1.2 billion is claimable. The most common question I get on it is, well, holy smokes, how much interest do we earn on all that money? People are fairly fascinated when we tell them zero, because as of right now, and we're going to change this is why we're talking, all of that $1.2 billion has been spent through the general fund process, 100% of it. Now, some make the argument that, well, not all of it's claimable at the end of the day. That's right, not all of it is, but most of it's claimable at the end of the day. And so this is why we're going to talk about what we did this session. But that $1.2 billion, you're all on the hook for. That is liability to the state of South Dakota. Somebody can come forward and claim that. You got to remember, this is not revenue. We're only to hold these dollars until we find the rightful owners, period, end of story. So when you see that $1.2 billion, remember, there is no money set aside to pay for that $1.2 billion in any capacity until next year. Go ahead. You go ahead. Right here first, Dale. Go ahead.
So when that was first set up, that wasn't looked at to make sure it didn't go into the general fund?
Talk about how small it was.
No, so I can get it in a couple slides here. I'll have a graph that will show, but up until 2014, we brought in about $6 million in unclaimed property, somewhere between $6 and $10 million a year in unclaimed property. Well, once 2014 happened, the laws were set up that the money that wasn't returned would go into the general fund. This is long before we ever worked in the office. Let's just say $6 million would come into the state. We'd return, the office would return $4.5 million. 1.5 million or so would end up going to the general fund. Well, that doesn't create a very big liability to the state in the grand scheme of things. But once we get to 2014 and the money starts to balloon, it goes from like 10 million to 30 million to 124 million in the span of 2 years. It's continued to snowball like that, and this liability has just grown at a rapid rate.
And I know we got slides to get through, but just for context, again, I asked you, how much did we bring in this year? $300 million. Somebody tell me what you think we're going to return this year. Any guesses? $50 million. The rest of that can just be spent.
What's the conversation at the legislature? Like, they just don't think this is an ongoing liability?
No, here's the deal. So we're going to get into this in just a second, about the struggles we had about 6 years ago when we started talking about the idea of a trust fund. I will tell you, the legislators from out here and really across the state this year, you guys did an awesome job. They'll get a round of applause when we're done, because they really did a good job changing the trajectory of unclaimed property. And we're going to get into that, Justin, here in just a few minutes. Yeah, Dale.
Question and follow up.
Yep.
So the items, and you had a bunch of them, this wages and so forth, so you get this money. You don't hold it in perpetuity, do you? I mean, there's years, right? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and then it's the states.
We hold, as soon as the funds come into the state of South Dakota under current law, they're transferred into the general fund. The items you're talking about, if they have
The funds have a date cutoff.
They're instantly transferred into the general fund when they come into the state of South Dakota, and then they're currently appropriated. The
dollars that come in, Dale, let's say Dale Barcher has $87. That's claimable forever. There's no cutoff. Now, there are some states that have a quote-unquote cutoff. It's not really a cutoff to take them so they can't claim the money. They just fall off the list. You can't really stop somebody from claiming what is rightfully theirs. It's not tax revenue. So it's still Dale Barcher's money. If Dale Barcher passes away at 136, which is about right, your heirs can come forward and still claim that. It still belongs to your family at that point in time. So that's why it's claimable in perpetuity. Even if somebody says, well, why not cut it off after 40 years? It might fall off of a list, but if a family does the work, it's still their money at the end of the day.
And just so you know, so the funds that would come in, even though they're spent in the general fund, they're still backed by the state of South Dakota. So if you come forward, even though the money's technically been spent, you would the state would pay you as long as the state has the funds to pay it, you know. But in others, we have had some states that have ultimately spent so much unclaimed property, like Louisiana, that they were not able to pay claims for a while. And so they passed a law, which is very similar to what we passed in South Dakota, a trust fund, where the money would go to a trust fund. They're allowed to take the money to pay claims out. And then the legislature is able to spend the interest, right? But not the principal.
And we'll get into that in more detail in just a minute.
So you mentioned the safety deposit boxes. So if you find an heirloom or something in the safety deposit box, do you archive those items, or do you put them on eBay, sell them?
So we archive them for a period of time. We usually hold on to them for about a year, and then they go to the state auction where people can buy them, and then that dollar value is claimable at the end of the day from a safety deposit box.
And if it's something that doesn't have like a monetary value but might be a historical value, a World War II uniform or letters from family members to each other that seem like they have a lot of meaning from a certain era, we can hang on to those for a while until when we can turn them over to a museum or somebody, and then they can ultimately be claimed long term. We don't have to destroy something.
Who handles the bond issues? Is that y'all's office? You guys, so South Dakota has 0 bonds that get issued?
We don't participate in any of the bonding. It's all through any of that would go through the State Investment Council, generally speaking, but we do not handle that.
What office is that under the State Investment Council?
They're on their own.
You're on the board of that, right?
I'm on the board. Yep. Go ahead.
You're currently seeking applications for a person.
Are you going to cover later what happened in 2014, why everything got?
Yep, I will. Yep.
I screw them up all the time, so I apologize.
So as you can see, most of this money is less than 10 years, so this money is not irrelevant. It's the information we're obtaining is not so old that it's completely impossible for this money to be claimed. The total claimable properties, less than 10 years old. This is the dollar amount, $932 million, that's less than 10 years old. Nearly 20% of the funds that are claimable are from this year alone. About 20% of property that comes into South Dakota lacks important identifying information, so that money is very unlikely to be returned. It comes without a name or anything. And then this is ultimately why we receive so much unclaimed property in South Dakota. So about 15 years ago, a couple of large financial institutions relocated their charter to South Dakota. So we receive sizable amounts of unclaimed property from all over the world and all over the United States. South Dakota has become a big banking hub, especially in Sioux Falls.
And so that's because of the trust stuff?
It's separate. So basically this has to do with the national associations deciding to incorporate their business in South Dakota. So, which is basically 2 pages of paperwork, 30 days notice. They set up shop in South Dakota. It doesn't necessarily mean they have a skyscraper here or anything, but on paper, they're here.
And most of the trust assets aren't housed in South Dakota, just the trust is done so.
Like the paperwork,
That's
yep.
exactly right.
So, and then this is ultimately why so much of those institutions, this is why so many of those institutions send their funds here once they're headquartered here, is the last known address that in a state that does not provide for a sheet of the property, the state where the holder is domiciled can take possession of the property. And this is called the second priority rule under the Supreme Court. So right here is a chart that basically shows how much unclaimed property we brought in 2008, 2009, all the way to 2025. So you can see where it goes from $8 million in 2008 to $33 million in 2013 to $124 million in 2014. And then it just kind of leveled off for about 8 years at around $80 million, $79 million. And then the last 3 years, it's spiked substantially. So we have brought in, I want to say in 2023, it was $114 million. 2024, it was $174 million. And 2025, basically going to end up being $325 million or so, because we just brought in another 24 million.
So I mean, let me tell you about, so if you go, so the spike, here's why the spike and the concern if you're looking at 23, 24, 25. Remember, this is global money. It's not just South Dakota money. And so what the financial institutions have told us is there have been so many people that have relocated globally due to COVID, and they'll forget to update their address, which sounds crazy, but that's what's happening. And that's why you're seeing a significant influx of cash. Now, on that note, they also tell us to expect another year, maybe two, of these large dollar amounts, and then to have it normalize back down below 100 million. This is why a trust fund is so important, because we're spending more and more of that money, and we're spending more and more of it on the ongoing side than we are one time. So I mean, the math doesn't math on that either, right? At the end, that's where our concern has been. And again, Jason will get into the trust here momentarily.
Here, I got ahead of myself here. So this shows where most of the money comes from. Most of this money comes from 2 or 3 financial institutions. This money is not the bank's money. This money belongs to their customers, to someone, an individual. 55% of these funds come from countries that speak English as their primary language. 20% come from Spanish-speaking countries, 8% Chinese, and 10% of this total dollar amount comes from South Dakotans. So this one kind of shows the amount of funds that have been returned over the last 15 years. You can see it kind of goes up right there in 2019 and 2020. We started implementing a program of data matching where we would take the financial information that the institutions would give us, Social Security information, and we would run it through a data matching program. And we started to find that it was very successful. Instead of you initiating the claim, the state would initiate the claim and make it a lot easier to return a lot more money.
And you can imagine some folks in government I can't swear up here, I apologize, I won't, but they were very upset because they just want people to come forward. They don't like that we advertise, and they really don't like when you initiate a claim for somebody because you can find them. Boy, oh boy, we had to hire an outside counsel for that. You remember that? It was one of the worst things we've ever been through because they're so addicted to the money.
So here, if you look at this chart on the second one to the left, you'll see the property counts that have been coming into the state of South Dakota. Well, back when we were bringing in 6 million, 8 million, 16,000 properties, 21,000 properties. Well, if you look down at the bottom of 2024, 404,000 properties now last year alone came into the state of South Dakota. Well, you can imagine the strain that puts on a staff of 5 or 6 people it's just impossible to really go through it. And so that is one of the struggles. So this is kind of where Josh brought this question up here. 0% of this money goes into the general, or all this money goes into the general fund. We earn 0 interest on this money currently. So money that comes in this year will pay for next year, so on, so on. And it ultimately sets up a risk for our state, because if we don't, what happens if one of these financial institutions leaves the state of South Dakota? What happens if we get a lot less money than we're relying on for the budgeting process, right?
I would like to answer that question.
Okay.
We're still on the hook for all the money, even if they leave.
You're breaching your fiduciary
And so, at the end of the day, the reason I talk about the financial education on the individual side is what we've been doing here and what you see government doing in general is a horrific example for people. How can we expect people to be good with their money when we can't even figure it out at the government level? What are we doing? And so that's why I bring up that personal financial education stuff, is it's important that we as a state are at least a good example at the end of the day.
So this chart ultimately shows how much money was coming into the state in the blue bars at the bottom, and then the purple is how much of that money was going into the general fund, and then the line that's going up is the debt, basically the perpetual liability to the state of South Dakota. So you can see it starts out pretty small, not necessarily something that's catastrophic if a lot of money were to be returned. But after a few years of spending, it actually should go higher, because it's over 1.2 billion now. But
Just because it's a ongoing future liability because FTE hiring or something like that, or how do you have that huge of a?
Well, so if it's an aggregate of the total. Every year we're compounding it by spending additional money. So Yeah, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to have the state continue that ongoing spending, usually it's not like, oh, we're gonna build this building and then it goes away. It's something that's an ongoing.
Well, so a lot of the money this year that came in, $310 million, a sizable amount of that money was taken and set aside for the prison construction, right? So just because they're gonna use it for a building doesn't mean that if the people who that money belongs to come forward to claim it, the state isn't responsible for paying it back, right? And that goes year after year after year. And this also shows where you might get a lot of states where the financial institutions are primarily holding their citizens from their states dollars. But in South Dakota, because we're taking money in from so many places around the country and around the world, like if we were to return $100 million in unclaimed property in 1 year, I believe in 2010 when Governor Dugard took office, he cut the budget 10%. That was $120 million, I think. So we're talking about a sizable amount of money that a small state like South Dakota would really struggle with if they were hit with it all at once.
Let's push forward with the trust.
So ultimately, Josh kind of touched on this earlier, but there are usually two competing views for unclaimed property. One, which is the one we've used for the last 10, 15 years, is that the money that comes into the state should be used for the greater good of society, like the prison construction or other projects.
I like your smile on that.
The other one is that this isn't tax revenue. This money belongs to someone else. It's not ours to spend, right? Now, we should put it into a trust fund, and then the interest earned can be used by the legislature on projects and things. And that money would be there forever to benefit the state. So up until this year, reason number one has been the one that's dominated the discussion and our policies. So 2025 legislative session, do you want to talk about this? You want me to?
Yeah, well, so we'll talk a little about the trust fund, but I'm going to back up because this is our success this year, but I'll do something that's unfamiliar for a politician. I'm going to admit a mistake. So we started on trust fund legislation 5-6 years ago. It's pretty simple. All it says is whatever we don't return to rightful owners plus our nominal expenses to do that gets set in a trust fund. That trust fund earns interest. It gets paid back at 4% to the state. So that is it's no longer a liability. It's a forever asset. And the general fund benefits from that at the end of the day. We had a great idea. Now, we didn't get that off the floor of the House when we first brought that. And you should always look back and say, what did I do wrong? What can I do better? When I look at the group of people we had sitting around the table, it was an echo chamber. It was all people that agreed with us at the end of the day. That was it. That's all it was. When I looked at it, I said, well, boy, we didn't have any diversity of thought. I know the other side's wrong, but you still have to hear them out. We didn't do any of that. So I knew that this year that we were going to have an opportunity to come forward again. And again, I learned from my mistakes. We brought together a diverse group of people, some who I really don't like, but we still brought them together and we heard about their concerns. It ultimately gave us the opportunity to share with them why this is so important to us, because we live this stuff every single day. And so, the great part about this, we were able to get this through both chambers this year without a single no vote. Not a single one immediately signed by the governor. So I rarely ask for this, but just for your legislators here, because they all voted yes, give them a round of applause because they changed the state. Jason will get into it a little deeper, but sincerely, you guys have great legislators here. They had open minds. I just couldn't be more proud of the group of people that did this. This is something that's very important to us. We didn't know how important it was going to be to the folks in this room, and you guys really stepped up. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart to say thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add what Josh said. A lot of this, it probably wouldn't have happened if Senator Howard hadn't returned to the legislature. She'd been championing this issue for years, and it was awesome that she came back, and it coincided with a great legislative group of people. Like Senator Carley was a big champion of this issue. Senator Voigt and Amber Hulse championed it. Senator Fry-Mueller championed it when she was in the legislature. But people like Senator Carley, who served on appropriations, they heard about this issue a lot. And, not everything that happened was done publicly, but there were just a lot of conversations that happened behind the scenes that just moved the needle. And ultimately, I think the people who generally had not been in favor of the idea realized doing nothing about it was not an option anymore, that the perpetual liability had snowballed so much over the last few years. I think in the last 3 years, we've brought in over like $615 million. So you can imagine it's one thing to do it 1 year or 2 years and think you're going to be able to pay it off or the state will sustain it. But what Senator Carley and some of the others saw, I think, when they got into the appropriations process was eye-opening, and it wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have had a different view from the legislature this year.
Leadership matters at the end of the day. It really does. Now, a couple things I want to just touch on this, and we'll kind of wrap it up for questions. I know we're getting towards the end. So I'm being honest when I said we have a trust fund, but we don't have a true trust fund. So we have a savings account that was passed by the legislature. So you have very limited investment options through the investment council when it's a legislatively passed trust fund. It's like I said, it's more like a money market savings. So the highest rate of return you're ever going to see on that is 4 to 5%. So what we need at the end of the day is there was also a joint resolution that puts us on the ballot in 2026. If the voters approve a permanent trust fund, then the investment council can take advantage of all of their investment tools and we can get this puppy up to 7 or 8% interest that we're earning on all of those dollars. So while we have taken a step in the right direction and we've had transformational change, which we promised, we need you all to finish this for us and talk about the importance of a permanent trust fund so the legislature can't change it over time and get that maximum interest earning ability. And we can only do that if you all vote for it. So that is really our ask at the end of the day, is that we need you all to step up and vote in favor of this. There's going to be a lot of stuff on the ballot in 2026. So we're going to be out talking about this as frequently as we can to make sure we're able to take full advantage of the South Dakota Investment Council and all of the tools that they have to make sure we're earning a maximum amount of interest.
Josh, will the Treasurer's Office champion the PR for that resolution? Who's going to champion that to get that information to the voters who, if they don't know, they vote no?
But this is what we're wrestling with, because you have to be you can't just use state funds and go out and start championing these things. I'm going to talk about it everywhere I go. We've explored the idea of a ballot committee and some other things to maybe raise some money, because rest assured, we're concerned. I'm very concerned with the amount of things that are going to be on the ballot that's just going to get overlooked. And let's say that happens. We still have a savings account, essentially. We call it a trust fund, but it's not a true trust fund at the end of the day. So we're going to have to get out and talk about it. I'm a grassroots guy. I love doing this kind of stuff and talking about getting people to show up. But you're right. We still have a little bit to figure out as far as how can we actually use dollars to promote this thing so it doesn't get overlooked. So we're still working on that deal.
Who's going to vote against, or who's going to come against you, do you think, so work against having this done?
I don't know that anybody's necessarily going to actively come forward. That's a bad position to be in, to say that now that could happen. But my concern is not so much that. My concern is lack of messaging from us, quite frankly, at the end of the day, getting out there. Because if people don't truly understand what we're doing, I mean, this is important stuff to us. It is transformational at the end of the day. This will be the largest trust fund in the history of our state in the next 10 years. It'll get to be over $1 billion. It's a long-term revenue source for the state, but we need people to know that at the end of the day. So that is where we have to get out and talk about it and do this type of stuff and say we need you all to be motivated to get out and vote in favor of this, because it is true fiscal responsibility at the end of the day.
It seems like we're missing something here, because you showed that graph that said we've got a $1.4 billion liability. But then even when we go to the trust fund, what are we doing to knock that liability back down? I don't see that again.
Again, a major concern of mine, because we're on the hook for that liability. Okay, and so why this is such a concern is Jason touched on the fact that we only have like 3 or 4 big holders that give us the majority of this money. And any one of them could leave 30 days notice and we're still on the hook for all of that money. This doesn't necessarily fix that. It's hedging it against making it worse in the future. I can't do anything about the mistakes that have been made in the past. I can only try to correct it for the future. And so what we're trying to do is hedge against this and say, okay, let's say a holder leaves and we have a $1.2 billion liability. We're on the hook for all of this, but we have nothing set aside. Right now we have zero. You're all on the hook for it as taxpayers. We're trying to at least set something aside that earns interest, so if we have to go to something in emergency, at least something is set aside at the end of the day.
But it seems like we shouldn't be spending the interest until we torn that thing down.
I agree with that, and that'll be up to the legislature early on to determine how to do that.
Can you pull it back to the purple and blue columns? So purple is spent every year, or is purple just appropriated every year?
This is the, so the part, the blue part that's above the purple, that's what was ultimately returned each year. So then the purple part is what, or estimated to be returned in the most recent one, but the purple one is what ultimately went to the general fund. This
Track or is it reserved at the end because it's piled back onto the trust?
Just goes in the general fund, right?
it just goes into the general
It
fund.
goes into the general fund, we lose all control of it, and all tracking. We lose all.
I mean, I can't tell you what it's been spent on, but we know who it belongs to. Like if somebody comes to claim their money, we've got that information and everything. But
Try to build this fund, if it's left over 10 years of reserve on that chunk, could you put it back?
well, like right now, I think on the bottom line of at the end of session, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's about 150 million still sitting there that's being discussed for the prison. Maybe 180. I don't know how much it is, but it's a lot.
And I will
That's
tell
a
you,
lot.
that is unclaimed property money. Just period, end of story. I would sure like it if they would say, hey, let's pre-fund this trust that's going to start next year. Do you think it's going to happen? Okay. But say that again? Yeah. I don't use any taxpayer money for commercials, just so you know.
No, use some of this money.
Yeah, well, I'd like to do that too.
So how this SB 155 sets it up for starting July 1st?
Yeah.
So Senate Bill 150.
180 million that we have left over in this current year is just
It'll be spent. Yeah.
Okay.
The quickest we could get this done was July 1.
So there was no consideration of an emergency clause, or it wouldn't have gotten through?
Hindsight's 2020. I mean, it would have been nice to try for an emergency clause at the end of the day. But I about fell over when I saw 0 no votes on just what we were doing.
Yeah.
Right? I'm guessing if people realized what they had done by reducing their one-time money, they might have a change of heart, but this is still the right thing to do at the end of the day. We could have, so our initial discussion was just take this to the ballot, let's get it done that way, the right way, but we'd be missing out on a couple of years of what we consider would still be large one-time dollar amounts coming in, right? So we can't change the past, but if we have 300 million come in next year, that sizable portion of that is going to be required to go into the trust fund. That doesn't do anything about this year. I get it. I'm as frustrated about that as anybody. I would love to see that go in there, not go to prison funding or any of this other stuff. But we can't change that at this time. What we can do is work forward.
And the amount that goes in every year is dictated based on the net proceeds?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Correct.
So it's not like a fixed amount? It's
No,
it's all
you're right.
net proceeds from unclaimed property.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
We don't have any idea year to year how much is going to come into South Dakota. That's the financial institutions, that's the businesses that have to report. And we find out in October, at really the beginning of November, how much is being reported. And so this year, when we found out 310 million was coming in, I think it's now closer to over 320, but we'd already put forward a budget with using historical data and the estimates. We thought 174 million from the year before was high. So when they told us we were getting 310 million in, we'd already gone through our budgeting process with BFM and it explained how much it was what our estimates were on returns and staffing, and then we found out we were way off, and so.
Digital currency?
No, it's not right now.
It's not right now, but we had a bill passed this year that says digital currency is required to be sold before we get it. That's what Kelmar, our software partner that's going to work on auditing all this digital currency, asked us to do. So we will get the sale of the digital currency starting next year, but it is not right now. But now that we've had that law, we'll be able to start taking.
And just to go to your point, Dale, about how the ballot process, this has been on the ballot in other states. It's generally a very popular idea. You know, so in Louisiana, it passed with around 70% of the vote. Most people don't think the state should be spending this money. They're very supportive of the idea of it going into a trust fund and the state benefiting from the interest long term. And with 105 people voting yes on it and the governor signing the bill, I don't foresee a lot of opposition. There were a lot of associations, I think, who generally supported the concept. So I don't know I don't really see where the opposition would come from at this point.
And we'll do one or two more because I know folks probably need to get back to work. And go ahead, you had another one.
Is there any way that the Appropriations Committee can introduce a bill that would mandate $250 million comes out of the general fund every year? I mean, we waste it anyway. I mean, being there, went up $4 billion, what I'm saying. But to reimburse the trust fund, because actually it's, you know, a lot of it's our money and we're the ones that are going to have to come up with it. So why couldn't they have some kind of a bill, you know, that would force them to put that money into the trust fund?
Right. I would have typically told you that is never going to happen, right? But with new leadership and new folks, you never know. What I would tell you, so I'm term limited. I've got a little over a year left, and then you'll have a new state treasurer. I can't say who's running, but you'll have a new state treasurer. You'll have a new state treasurer, and that new state treasurer is going to have to work on that. That, you know, if there is a way to get them to pay back some of it, it's better than nothing at all. But that has been an unrealistic thing until you realize you got folks like John Carley on appropriations, and they're realistic people. They may look at it and say, we should be doing something to continue to reduce the liability because we're not handling the $1.2 billion yet. We're hedging for the future, but we're not taking care of what's there, right? And so I think that is a potential reality. I've only got 40 days left with the legislature, and I'm done. His friend still? Yeah, I like Jason. He's a good guy. No. No. I'm not. No, I mean, but no, well, we'll see. I mean, I just tell you on that, I still have an absolute thirst and appetite for public service. And, you know, when I ran, I said we were going to make some transformative changes. And I get it. I'm the treasurer. I'm not the governor, you know. So the changes we make get less attention at the end of the day. But what we've done with just this one thing truly will change our course forever and ever for generations to come. So I'm very proud of that. But I'm not done. I don't know what that necessarily means, but I've still got a desire to serve. And actually, we need people who can't care about the next election. You can't care about paychecks or any of this stuff. It's got to be about making a difference at the end of the day. You say what you believe, be honest every time you talk, and you don't have to cover your tracks. So we'll see what that looks like soon.
So.
To be continued. Any other final questions before we?
What district are you in, just out of curiosity?
Huron.
I'm from Huron. So yeah, well, you know it. So I mean, I'm a real estate investor. So we own a motel and we've got a bunch of properties there, so we can't leave. So that is not where my eyes are looking at present time. But thank you for asking. That wouldn't take much.
So we had the bill that includes crypto now into the escheatment laws and unclaimed property.
That's right.
Now, some of those accounts, maybe we might own under anonymous accounts.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible that those get escheated and then we can never figure out the owner?
We only get the sold amount. It's required to be sold before it comes to us. So we just get the dollar value amount. And I believe it's still a 3-year dormancy on that is what the law says for all of these companies. So what's going to have to happen? There's going to have to be it's going to take some time because there's going to be an audit that has to happen of all of the holders of that digital currency. But we get it after it's sold. So we get the value of the sold amount. The U.S. dollars cash. So
some of those accounts are held in basically like Swiss accounts, like numbered accounts.
That's right. If they're anonymous and it still gets turned over, it would fall likely into that 20% where we get no contact information. It's money that is never going to be returned, so it's probably safe to assume if that 20% has been spent by the state, it's not going to get returned.
Because it's impossible to track that.
That's right. That's right. Last one.
I think you covered this, but can you just, what was the year that the Unclaimed Property Fund started, and what is the total amount that has been put in since it started?
Go ahead.
And it's put in and spent?
Well, it's-
Well, I think the total that's been turned over since it's been coming into the state, which was decades before we ever worked there, it's probably around 1.5 billion, 1.5 and a half. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's just
It's
over.
right around 1.5.
It's just over 1.5 billion, and
300 million.
yeah, so we've returned just over 300 and probably 320 million.
Because again, a lot of this money is not in South Dakota. We only focus on returning it in South Dakota. But with cash it, which is where we can initiate the claim, you're going to see our amount returned grow
And
at the end of the day.
And we return it to anyone who file,
Yeah.
anybody who turns in a form to get their property back.
So for context, we get calls from overseas all the time. We only have 4 or 5 staffers total that work on this stuff, and none of them speak a foreign language. So the language barrier gets to be a tough thing at the end of the day for our folks, and it slows up the process quite a bit.
And I think it's important to end with the idea that while we have $1.2 billion claimable, that doesn't mean it's, the odds that it's going to be returned are probably pretty low, especially the farther you get. But just imagine if we were to return 10% of 1.2 billion. It's just a sizable amount. It would be very detrimental to the current system and our current budgeting process. And so as we go through and have technology improvements and advances, it's going to be easier to return money that we haven't been able to return in the past. So those are things to just be careful of and mindful of.
So with that, listen, thanks for opening up your church. I always love coming here. I appreciate you guys coming. I know if there's more questions, we're going to stick around for a while. Thank you for the work that you do for conservative candidates, and God bless each and every one of you. Thank you, guys.